This podcast does not provide medical advice. Please listen to the complete disclosure at the end of the recording.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Everyone Dies, the podcast. I'm Marianne Matzo.
And I'm Charlie Navarrete, where currently I am in Little Italy. So if you hear music in the background, that's why. People are happy that to be out on a relatively warm night.
That's great.
Yeah.
So put your feet up, relax, and thank you for spending the next hour or so with us as Charlie talks about the history of funeral food. In the second half, I'm going to talk about hospice and what's expected of the family while a family member is under hospice care. And I guess we'll get started with talking about the food.
Yes.
So we're going to start exploring some different cultural practices regarding burial and food. But I want to say right up front that not everyone in a cultural group follows all the practices of their cultural heritage. We may choose to mix and match customs or foods based on our beliefs, our own personal tastes. So just because we tell you about a particular group, always ask the person who's planning the funeral. Well, I'd say ask the deceased, but you'd have to do that ahead of time, so we won't do that.
Yes.
But how you can help and what you can bring. Don't assume that because we've told you something about a Hispanic family funeral that every Hispanic family is going to do everything we say, because that ain't going to happen.
Okay.
So the best thing you can do is ask. And they might say, oh, it's very traditional, or they might say, oh, yeah, we're sitting Shiva tonight. And you'll go, what? That doesn't go with the Hispanic family, but who knows? Maybe they really like that practice, and that's what they're going to do.
Or maybe instead of Catholics, they're Jewish.
Well, or maybe they just like some parts of Judaism. So who knows?
Okay.
Hispanic culture is rich and vibrant and exuberant and colorful, with traditions dating back through centuries of cultural influence from more than 20 countries. The Hispanic family bond is strong and brings special meaning when saying goodbye to a loved one. Catholicism is very deeply rooted within Hispanic heritages, even non-Catholics, including Catholic traditions in their funerals. So Charlie's going to tell us a little bit more about that. Charles?
Well, hello. I'd like to speak to you about today's food choices. Cannibalism. So pull up a chair, pour yourself a glass of wine, red wine, and let's dig in.
So what are we having? Meatloaf?
So, listen.
Those who don't know, that's from Rocky Horror Picture Show, where they eat meatloaf, literally.
Oh, that's right, literally. Yes.
Literally.
Meatloaf died, you know.
When?
I'm going to say 2 years ago. 3 years ago? 2 years ago. 2 or 3 years ago.
Huh. I don't know how I missed that. That's very sad. I loved his music.
Yeah. So, going...
Van Halen died this week.
I know. Oh, I just always found it fascinating. I mean, he's he's a great guitarist. Remember that lick in Beat It? I mean, that's Eddie Van Halen. I mean, that he was able.
Really?
Yeah. When I've known that for years, but it's just the thought of what you'd see, Van Halen's usual music and everything, and then. I don't know how Michael Jackson had the insight to ask him to play that guitar lick. Yeah, that's Eddie Van Halen. Unbeat It.
Did you ever wonder about Valerie Bertinelli and Eddie Van Halen? Didn't they seem like they were kind of mismatched?
Maybe that's why they divorced. I don't know.
Yeah, but they were married for a super long time, weren't they?
I don't remember.
Well, anyway, rest in peace, Eddie. So, you were saying, I'm sorry.
Oh, it's fun. So, the history of food and mourning begins with the actual consumption of the deceased, cannibalism. Over time, it changes to the concept of providing food for the departed. Then, by the Middle Ages, funeral food focuses on feeding the living mourners. Scientists have found evidence of cannibalism on Paleolithic remains in Europe, as well as intentionally created ritual markings on human bones. it's difficult to understand and know exactly the motivations of our ancestors more than 12,000 years ago. But some paleontologists believe, various ancient cultures participated in endocannibalism, which is basically cannibalism of members of one's own family or tribe. Fun. So, exocannibalism, or revenge cannibalism, is the type we may be most familiar with.
That's the kind that I engage in.
I didn't know that about you.
Yeah, so don't piss me off. Oops,
yes. That's that's the consumption of an enemy, often at the end of a war. But the endocannibalism is a ritual performed at funerals for loved ones. I wonder what they do. I wonder what they do with people they don't like.
Yeah.
Yeah. So these Paleolithic rituals survived in different cultures in vastly different parts of the world through the 20th century, most notably in Papua New Guinea, where a loved one was consumed to pass on their spirit to descendants, and in the Amazon River Basin, where a corpse is eaten by a family to emphasize that a body is just meat, a physical vessel for a human life. When we see traditions span this far across the world, anthropologists take it as a sign that it's a ritual that evolved early in human experience before humans spread out across the planet. It is easy to find a similar example of endocannibalism in modern Western culture. In Catholicism, there we are. In Catholicism, parishioners all take communion, a cracker and a sip of wine that are symbolic of the body and blood of Christ.
Now, had you ever really thought about it as cannibalism when you were a kid?
When I was a kid and had to do all that, I had no idea what the word cannibalism meant. As I grew older, I still didn't associate it ever with that.
I never did. My niece just the other day, posted a picture of me in my first communion outfit, with the crown and the white and the rosary.
Sure.
And who knew I was being dressed as the perfect little second grade virgin to participate in a cannibalism ritual.
Certainly not I.
Certainly not I. The nuns never mentioned it.
No, they didn't. What type of shoes did you wear?
They were white, I'm sure.
Okay.
Probably patent leather, but I wasn't dancing with boys in second grade, so that's okay.
No, I just remember when I was in Catholic school at that age, when the girls wore the shoes, they could not be glossy. Because, it's funny, I remember this clearly, because the idea was it could reflect, there could be a reflection from, from up a dress.
But like I said, I was in second grade, so that wasn't an issue, because in second grade, were boys, no, boys didn't look at stuff like that in second grade.
No.
So cannibalism.
Hey, it's not just for breakfast anymore. So, food began to take on a more symbolic meaning at about 4,000 years ago in ancient Egypt, where food, like bread and beer, were left in tombs for the deceased for their spiritual nourishment. Paintings of cattle and birds on the walls would provide further sustenance once the worldly food ran out. We can see a transition at King Midas's funeral in 8th century Anatolia, which is located in modern-day Turkey. A feast of goat stew and fermented beverages was presented in his tomb for his spiritual nourishment, but was then consumed by the funeral attendees while he wasn't looking. Okay. Then the table, dinnerware, and leftovers, everything was sealed in the tomb with Midas's body. And actually, all of this was found in 1957 by University of Pennsylvania archaeologists.
63 years ago.
Yeah. Food in mourning becomes focused on the living during the feudal system of the Middle Ages. When a lord died, an averill was held, an Old English word for heir's ale. Essentially, all the surrounding lords would come to toast the new heir. A massive feast was provided, both because the attendees might come from far away and because the bigger the feast, the more powerful it made the deceased seem. So there was a sweetbread called Averil or Averil that was passed out to attendees and any serfs on the property. Funeral Averil is a special form of crisp bread or cake, and ale was provided. This was the nature of the simnel cake or the soul bread, which is still used in Belgium at funerals. So this bread was passed out to the attendees and any of the serfs on the property. Funeral Averil is a special form of crisp bread or cake, and ale was provided. So we see that the feast was once considered not so much as a commemoration of the dead, but a banquet to welcome the new heir to the title or property. The king is dead, long live the king, or in lesser measure, the squire is dead. Let us welcome the young master who succeeds him. So there are a few interesting details as to the consumption of food on such an occasion. And this is quoted by Capes from a record of 1309, when the provisions were as follows. You may want to grab a pencil and paper.
Okay, I'm ready.
All right. 1.5 butts of cider.
Now, do I even need to ask what a butt of cider is?
I did know this once. A butt is, yeah, okay. 5 pigs, 1 hare, not on your head, but like Bugs Bunny.
A bunny.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Bugs Bunny, yeah. 1 hare, 5 sheep, 13 hens, 19 geese, 1.5 gallons of oysters, 2 hogs, 9 capons, 1.5 carcasses of beef, 4 bacons, besides wine, ale, eggs, bread given to the poor and friends, and a fee of 66 shillings and 8 pence to the chaplain. 50 pounds of wax was also used, one presumes for candles.
Or, could be some kinky stuff going on back then.
Well, it was, who knows? Who knows?
That whole wax dripping thing.
Yeah, exactly. There was no crew from Entertainment Tonight to record all this stuff, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So the consumption of Averil was symbolic flesh consumption, descended from the Paleolithic traditions and reflective of Catholicism. Such endocannibalism was presented in secular European culture with the medieval Averil, and in America in the 18th and 19th centuries. Historically, funeral food was a way to help the living find meaning in death. It represented a passing on of a spirit, either to the descendants of the deceased or perhaps on to a higher realm. Today, although symbolic rituals around food and mourning still exist, food's most important purpose is to comfort the mourners. Across cultures in America, whether it's Jewish or Mormon, Italian or Southern Black, food is often provided by the community for the family of the deceased. Hams and casseroles, bagels and cakes are delivered to the house of the mourners to provide substance, comfort, and to let those that have lost a family member know they are loved.
Charlie, you can always send me food to show me how much you love me, especially since now you're living in Little Italy.
Twinkies have a shelf life of, a generation. So I can send you a couple of those bad boys. And
I like
they'll arrive
the
fresh.
cannoli from, what's that store that's the really great cannoli place down there in Little Italy?
Yeah, I have to tell you, I don't I don't buy anything down here. I go other places for Italian food. And no. Well, listen. No offense to the folks here, but there are other places
with the cannoli. But the cannoli.
Yeah, I'm sorry. For me, there a lot of them. Listen, if you want a great cannoli, in the East Village, there's this 100-year-old Italian bakery still using the same formulas called Venero's. Great cannolis, the Italian cheesecake, mamma mia. Oh, wow, it's just spectacular. I'm sorry.
I'm trying to think of the one that was right. Ferrara's, that's it.
Ferrara's, sure, okay. Yeah, that's on Grand Street.
See?
Yes.
I don't know how I pulled that out of my brain, but this should be a day to go down in history because I remembered something. All right.
So, in future podcasts, we're going to continue to talk about culturally specific morning traditions and a food.
I bet people are thrilled.
I'm sure they're looking forward to it. Yeah. I'm not sure after today, but yes, I'm sure in general they're looking forward to it. So that being said, listen, folks, please go to everyonedies.org. That's the number one, dies.org, and send us your own recipes to share with others. I don't know if we should be requesting recipes with dialogue about cannibalism.
Well, you never know what you're going to get.
Yes.
Might be something wonderful.
Yeah, that's what I'm afraid of. So, listen, we also appreciate questions and anything else you want to tell us. maybe not this episode, but in future episodes, anything you want to tell us. So, yeah, listen, you can email us at everyonedies.org. And please join our Facebook group, Everyone Dies. And remember, please, to rate and review the podcast, this podcast, and be kind. Molly, our fabulous Twitter fancy lady, is hoping you contribute to her job security. To her job security by following us on Twitter and reposting her tweets.
That would be great.
Yes.
So, Charlie.
Yes, I know Charlie.
In our
infinite
second half.
Wit and jest.
Yes, he is a half-wit.
Yes.
Maybe three-quarter. So in our second half, we're going to talk about hospice. And I know we've talked about hospice before. And so for our listeners, if you want to go back and, if you can stand it, go back and listen to the palliative care podcast we did like really way in the beginning where we talk about hospice care and some of the details of hospice care. So tonight or today, we're circling back to the concept of hospice and a little bit of background, but then to talk more about what it is to be the family member who's taking care of somebody who's receiving hospice care. So hospice really goes back to medieval times when travelers on pilgrimages would stop at a designated hospice for food, medical treatment, and lodging. And as time passed, these hospices became known as places of rest for travelers who were sick and dying and who really could go no further. There's sort of two undeniable, unavoidable natural facts of life. We're born and we die. Right. And I don't want to, be like, cavalier about that, but it's just the facts. There's no surprise in either event, yet for many years, both were hidden away. You remember, like when we were younger in the 50s, if somebody was pregnant, they wore, really big balloony shirts. Pregnant people weren't allowed to be on TV. There would be a period where they would actually go into confinement, it was called, because once they started to show, it was considered rude to go out and walking around in public and show that you actually had sex and now you got a baby in you. Do you remember that episode of, I think it was more than one, but there was one famous one of I Love Lucy where she's trying to tell Ricky that she's pregnant, but she can't. She can't say the word on TV. Right. Yeah. And actually, she was the trailblazer in terms of being the first woman to be on TV with little Ricky in her. Yeah. So, medical professionals sort of made decisions about life's beginning and life's end. And as time has gone on, families have reclaimed their right to have childbirth reflect their own wishes and values. And it changed the standards of good obstetrical care. Back in the old days, and I mean old days like when we were young, if, the doctor was in a hurry, they would put forceps in, grab the baby by the head and pull him out and cause damage to the kids, in a hurry to get them out. Or they gave the women what was something called Twilight, which was a cocktail of drugs that when she woke up, she had no memory of giving birth. And dads were not allowed to be there to see anything that happened. And I don't know if they maybe would be happy to go back to that or not. But nonetheless, the doctors in the hospitals really dictated, here's what birth is going to be like. And then, the sort of 60s came along and there was a revolution. There was a change. And, they had new ideas about childbirth. Moms decided they didn't want to welcome a new life into the family all by themselves. That it should be a family affair. Dads decided they didn't really want to sit out in the waiting room worrying about the person they loved most. It should be a family affair. And in the 70s or so, hospice care services began to become popular because, again, death should be a family affair. According to the National Hospice and Palliative Care Association, hospice is now a $19 billion, that's with a B, industry, almost entirely funded by the taxpayers. But as the business grows, so does the burden on the families, who are the ones who are providing most of the care. So the way it works is that every insurance that you have has a hospice benefit or clause in it, saying that if you have less than 6 months to live, as determined by your physician, who has absolutely no way of knowing for sure that this is your last 6 months, the doctor has to certify it, write the order, and then you have access to benefits. So, and I'll tell you what those are.
Yeah, but is that across the board? I mean, every insurance offers that?
Yes.
And
yes.
Are there any limits on someone's condition? Just
they're supposed to have less than a 6 months prognosis, so that puts a limit on the condition, and they can't be pursuing curative treatment. So you can't be getting chemo at the same time. And it's the same time
as okay.
Right.
Yeah. All right.
So usually hospice care is offered at home. Sometimes it's in a nursing home because it's set up to be available wherever the person calls home. So if you've been living in a nursing home and now you need hospice care, since the nursing home is your home, that's where you can get the care. There are hospice houses and residences, but they're pretty rare in communities. Like in Oklahoma City, we might have two now, but I remember when the first one opened, so it wasn't, that long ago. An inpatient facility is rarely an option, though, because it's expensive, and there's really strict criteria in terms of what needs to be done. People generally have to have unmanaged symptoms in order to have Medicare or your insurance company pay for this higher rate of care. So hospice care services includes a team of professionals who work together to care for the patient and the family. They work together to provide support and understanding to the patient and the family. They provide pain control to make patients comfortable while keeping them as alert as possible. Pain and the side effects of medication so the patient has control over his or her life and makes his or her own decisions. Spiritual care, so there's always a spiritual counselor of some sort. It means different things to different people, but it includes helping the patients say goodbye to loved ones, helping patients come to terms with dying, or helping patients with specific religious ceremonies. And this care is extended to the patient and the family. So think about hospice care. It's not just the person who's dying. It is care for the patient and their family. It's written that way. That's how it's meant to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They'll provide home care and hospital care depending on the situation. The patient may choose to stay within his or her home. Hospice services can help if the patient ever needs to be admitted to the hospital. But if you need to be admitted to the hospital, you unelect hospice, go to the hospital and let your regular insurance pay for that, and then are discharged back to hospice. Because once you're on hospice and getting a hospice benefit, they have to pay for everything related to your care for a certain daily rate, which is why chemo's not included, which is why, surgery's not included. So you have to take a look at electing and unelecting. And that can be confusing to people. Well, why do I have to unelect it? Well, you can unelect and elect that care as many times as you need to, depending on what's going on. And it gets interesting. Like, I had a patient when I was working in hospice once who kind of had some jerky movement. And when she jerked a certain way, I could just see she had done something to her arm. And in assessing her, it looked like her arm had been broken because she jerked it and kind of hit the side rail. And so I called the medical director, and I was real new to hospice at that point. And I said, well, do we send her to the hospital? I really think she broke her arm. And he said, you've got to sit down with the family and ask what the goal of care is, because she's not going to live long enough for the arm to heal. So you can kind of upset her and put her in an ambulance and send her to the hospital, to the the cold emergency room, and x-rayed and set the arm and do all of that and bring her back home. And it's not going to heal before she dies. Yeah. Or you can, kind of wrap it to stabilize it so she's not, moving it around, manage the pain, but that's a decision she and her family need to make. And like I said, I was new to hospice. I was like, that made perfect sense, but it wasn't how I'd practiced nursing all those years, somebody breaks something, you fix it.
You fix it, right.
Without thinking that, well, there's not enough time for it to heal. So I had to have a family meeting to talk about it. So we can do this, or we can do this. And the family and her decided, you know what, just leave it, just make her as comfortable as you can. And, because, it was, clear she wasn't that far away from the end of her life.
Right.
So that's that balance between what's going on at home and what's going on in the hospital. They also provide some respite care, which is care that's set up by the hospice for family members and home caregivers. It offers them some time to run errands and rest and relax for some short periods of time. It's not a daily thing, it's not for long hours, and it's not for overnight. The other service that's provided is bereavement care, which hospice offers bereavement counseling to the family both before and after the death. So since the mid-1990s, Medicare has allowed the hospice benefit to cover more types of diagnosis, and so there's more and more people. So in the beginning, it was really primarily people with cancer. And then they started saying, well, there's lots of diseases that have an end stage to them that need symptom management. So you can have end stage heart disease, for example, where you're very short of breath and you can't lie down and you can't get comfortable. Well, end stage heart disease, yes. So then they started providing care for that. And Alzheimer's disease is another one that, so any disease that can result in your death is covered under hospice.
Okay.
So hospice agencies usually will bring any kind of what's called durable medical equipment that you need. Durable medical equipment is anything that's a bed or a commode that can be, disinfected and used again. So if somebody's having trouble sleeping in a regular bed, or the care to wash them and change them is too hard and bending over a regular bed, they'll bring in a hospital bed. They'll bring in oxygen, wheelchair, whatever equipment that people say. I had patients say, I really, want to go to the mall, but I need my oxygen. Well, so we got a portable oxygen machine-y thing she could go to the mall, So all of that is covered and paid for by hospice as it relates to the disease that's resulting in the end of your life. Medicare says that hospice benefits can include home health aides and homemaker services, but in practice, that in-person help is often limited to a couple of baths a week. Medicare data reveal that on average, a nurse or an aide is only in the patient's home about 30 minutes or so per day.
Oh,
Medicare is charged nearly $200 a day for that care. So family members are surprised when the hospice provider does not do most of the physical work, but that's left to the family. Family members often feel that the final weeks, they feel more like they're a tired nurse than a devoted family member.
right, exactly.
And I can, remember working, as a hospice nurse and people saying, well, so, I'm so glad you're here, going in to do an admission. I did a lot of the admissions, and they'd say, well, let me show you to your room. And I'd be like, no, I don't stay here. They're like, well, what do you mean you don't stay here? Who's going to take care of, my husband?
Right, exactly.
Like,
Yeah,
well, that's for you. And I can remember this one lady, she was so teeny tiny, and she had this big husband, like he was way bigger than her. And I looked at, and they were both very old, and I looked at her and I looked at him, and I, in my head, was like, oh crap, what am I going to do? It was an evening admission. There was no way she was going to be able to roll him, change his, incontinence pads or do anything for him. There was no way, physically looking at her. And I was just like, I just felt horrible. So I had to talk with her about, okay, so here's what hospice is. Here's what has to be done. And who in your family can help you? Oh, well, I have a son, but he's very busy with his family and his job. And I'm not going to bother him, she said. So, well, we need to really talk about that, because one of the things when the nurse comes in to do the hospice admission is that the family caregiver has to sign a piece of paper that says, I'm taking responsibility for caring for this person.
Oh,
and
okay.
so that's a real difficult situation to be in, because they're signing, oh yeah, I'm going to do this, and then they find out what's involved. We have an interview this week with a woman who mom was in hospice care, and she talks about how when they were going over the medications, she just looked at her sister and says, are you guys expecting us to give her all of her medicines and do it correctly? And they're like, yes, we are. And she was totally freaked out by what was required of her.
Yeah.
I took care of my mom when she was in hospice care. I took care of my sister. And I can remember, especially in taking care of my mom, how utterly exhausted I was, because she was hanging on for weeks. And her brother and people would come in and say, well, so how long is this going to go on? It's like, you get to the point where you want to say, well, I won't tell you what I wanted to say, but anybody who knows me, you can kind of fill in the blank of what I was wanting to say. And at one point, I was really exhausted. My sister was there, and my uncle said, so how, for the 100th time, how long do you think it's going to go on? And I said, I don't know. Is there a convenient time for you? Because maybe we can arrange that. And my sister was like, oh, she's just kidding. She's just kidding. She doesn't really mean that. And I walked out of the room. Why are you asking me? I don't have a crystal ball. All I'm doing is taking care of my mom. I don't know. And so when family members get like that, I can really relate, because I can remember that. I remember going to do an admission once on a woman who was taking care of her sister. And this woman was a nurse. She had flown in from I don't know where to take care of her sister who was dying. And it was probably my first hospice visit after I had taken care of my sister who died. And I remember just looking at her and saying, please remember that you're a sister first. Let yourself be a sister and grieve your sister's death.
Right, yeah.
Because I never had that. I was never either let myself have it or asked to have it, or nobody even thought to say, do you need to be a sister now? And I think that happens with nurses, but the hospice system itself kind of, the way it's been set up is that you have to be the caregiver, and it's your mom or your husband or whoever who's dying. but you still got to give them their medicines. You still got to help them with their bath. I'd have patients who, like, I think, why are they still in pain? There's this med and that med. And finally, one of the family members said, look, one of those medicines is, given rectally. I'm not putting anything up my father's ass, is what he said. Like, okay, well, that explains to me while the pain wasn't managed was because this one medicine, which went in the rectum, was not being given.
Right.
But he never like admitted that to anybody before, So what's expected from the caregiver? You're in a situation where you're responsible for the care and the well-being of a terminally ill person. That's really hard. You've got backup from the hospice team. They're going to visit regularly, but they visit. They take care and they manage things, but they're not there 24 hours a day.
Right.
And when I would be on call, like the calls would start like when the sun go down, and I'd be like prepared for it. Be like, I'd see the sun go down and think, okay, now people are going to start to panic, and the phone would start to ring. Well, this is happening. Well, this is happening. It's scary. You're all alone with a person who's at the end of their life. So some of the responsibilities that you have, if you elect to be the hospice caregiver, is the personal care of the patient. And this involves the patient staying clean and comfortable, assistance with bathing, going to the bathroom, applying lotion to dry skin, teeth, shaving, washing, combing their hair, clean clothes, clean bed linens, making nails on their hands and feet are trimmed. Medications. As a primary caregiver, you'll make sure that the patient has all their prescriptions filled, that the correct dosages are given at the proper time. This can include anything from pills to syrup to patches to injections to rectal things. And I remember getting a call from a wife whose husband had died, and I got there to pronounce him, and she's like going over the medicine. Now, here's what I gave him. And I'm thinking, part of my brain is thinking, yeah, you did the right thing. And then the other part of my brain kind of clicked on and said, oh, I see what's going on here. I said, you did exactly what was supposed to be done. What you did not kill your husband. And then she started sobbing. Oh. Because that's what she thought.
Right.
She gave the medicine, and then he died. And just like I tell my nursing students, I tell family members, there is always going to be a last dose of medicine. That doesn't, it's not cause and effect. It's just the last one. And so I'm so glad I kind of woke up to that concern that she had, so that, she didn't go through the rest of her grieving thinking she had killed him. Medical care. This can involve cleaning and changing bandages on pressure ulcers, taking the temperature, applying ice or heat, or taking blood pressures. Managing the medical equipment. You'd have to be how to use any medical equipment, including oxygen, wheelchair, a lift, a hospital bed. All of this will be your job. Now, I'm not telling you this in any way to say, oh, that's way too much for any human being to do. No, I just want you to be aware that when you are receiving hospice benefit, which is wonderful in terms of it'll pay for all your medicine and you'll have that extra layer of support, but it's an extra layer of support so your family member can die where they choose to die with the people around them and the dog on the bed or whatever it is that they wish. And so you might think that you're able to do it all, but be humble, let people help you. We have resources on the website with this podcast. Something called Caring Bridge is wonderful. It's a free website that lets you have one place to share information about what's going on, and people can sign up to bring meals, people can sign up to do other things. So it's none of this, oh, so what do you need? Nope, they just go online. It's like, oh, look, food's at the door. And it makes it easier for you because you don't have to ask, and it makes it easier for other people because they can say, I'm taking that day and I'm bringing whatever. So it's called caringbridge.org. I'd really think it's a good idea to check that out. So physical care, family dynamics, dealing with death, exhaustion, family members annoying you, that's all part of this process.
Right, yeah.
And I'm just here to let you know that's what goes on. And listen to the radio show that we dropped this week too, to hear from somebody who lived through that. And we have lots of resources on our webpage, so please check that out.
Thank you for listening. Please stay tuned for future episodes of Everyone Dies. Our thanks to our executive producer, retired Major General David, our producer Sandy, John, our technical advisor, Molly, our Twitter correspondent, and our friends, family, and you, our loyal listeners who are supporting our work at Everyone Dies. This is Charlie Navarrete.
And I'm Marian Matzo, and we look forward to talking with you soon. Remember, every day is a gift. Thank you.
This podcast does not provide medical advice. All discussion on this podcast, such as treatments, dosages, outcomes, charts, patient profiles, advice, messages, and any other discussion are for informational purposes only and are not a substitute for professional medical advice or treatment. Always seek the advice of your primary care practitioner or other qualified health providers with any questions that you may have regarding your health. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard from this podcast. If you think you may have a medical emergency, call your doctor or 911 immediately. Everyone Dies does not recommend or endorse any specific tests, practitioners, products, procedures, opinions, or other information that may be mentioned in this podcast. Reliance on any information provided in this podcast by persons appearing on this podcast at the invitation of Everyone Dies or by other members is solely at your own risk.